Picture this. You're sitting there scrolling through your family group chat or maybe your main social media feed, and you decide to share something real. A brilliantly nuanced, highly researched, strictly data-driven post about a genuinely complex issue. You've done the work, you hit send, and nothing. Crickets. Maybe you get one polite, kind of obligatory thumbs up from an aunt, but then literally right below your message, someone shares a quote. It's this overly confident, totally unreasoned, somewhat toxic self-help mantra superimposed over, a majestic picture of a lion or a sunset. It contains absolutely zero evidence, it explains nothing, yet instantly, it just explodes. It gets endless likes, enthusiastic agreements, people are sharing it like crazy. Well, welcome to This Explainer, because today we are going to unpack exactly why that happens.
So I want you to really consider this kind of bizarre modern reality we're all dealing with. On one hand, we have the logical post, this beautiful artifact of nuance, data, and evidence, and it is entirely pitted against the empty golden quote, absolute, unreasoned, and highly emotional. Now, we are incredibly quick to cynically blame this whole dynamic entirely on social media algorithms, right? We tell ourselves the code is rigged to promote outrage and virality. But what if I told you the true vulnerability isn't actually in the code of the app at all, but rather in the ancient, deeply hardwired psychology of the human mind itself? The algorithm is really just holding up a mirror to a very uncomfortable truth about human nature. I want you to just sit with this question for a moment. Let it really sink in. Why does logic completely fail us when we are in a crowd? Because when we are isolated individuals, we can be highly analytical, careful, and rational. But the exact moment we join a collective, even a digital one, just scrolling on our phones, something fundamentally shifts. To understand this, we are going to look through the lens of a groundbreaking, somewhat cynical, but remarkably prophetic text written way back in 1895 by the French polymath Gustave Le Bon. It's called The Crowd, a Study of the Popular Mind. And Le Bon realized something frankly terrifying. Crowds are utterly, hopelessly immune to logic.
All right, let's get into Section 1, the death of nuance. We're going to talk about the complete loss of the critical spirit.
Le Bon established this foundational premise that honestly we see validated on our screens literally every single day. He observed that the exact moment individuals join a crowd, their critical spirit evaporates. Poof, gone. Their intellectual standard is immediately and considerably lowered. The brilliant PhD-level scientist and the totally uneducated novice, once they are swept up in the collective mind, become perfectly equal in their inability to observe objectively or reason carefully. As Le Bon so bluntly puts it, the laws of logic have no action on crowds. Think about what that means. Crowds can only comprehend rough and ready, basic associations of ideas. Long, nuanced chains of logical argumentation, they're totally incomprehensible to a group. If your post requires step-by-step critical reasoning, I hate to say it, but you have already lost the crowd.
Because here's the thing. Nature abhors a vacuum. Because the crowd literally cannot process logic, it craves something else entirely to fill that void. Crowds demand extreme sentiments and violent affirmations. Le Bon noted that crowds only entertain violent and extreme feelings. So what does this actually mean for our modern digital artifacts? Well, it means an online post must exaggerate to survive, period. To gain any sort of traction, it must never ever attempt to prove anything. It has to deal exclusively in absolutes. You cannot say, the data suggests there might be a slight correlation here. No way. You must scream, this is the absolute, unquestionable truth that is going to destroy you.
Which brings us to Section 2, the formula of affirmation. This is all about entirely bypassing the conscious mind.
So if logic is completely out the window and exaggeration is the new currency, how exactly do you hijack the mind of the crowd? Le Bon observed the great leaders, the manipulators, and the powerful speakers of history, and he identified a very specific mechanism. What exactly is an affirmation in Le Bon's terms? It is simply a statement kept entirely free of all reasoning and all proof. Just stating something boldly and stating it concisely without any accompanying evidence whatsoever is the absolute surest way to bypass the critical mind. Think about it. If you provide evidence, you inherently invite debate. You invite the individual to turn their critical brain back on to analyze your proof. But by stripping away all the proof, you present a finished, unassailable object. The idea just slips right into the crowd's consciousness without triggering a single one of their analytical defenses.
Le Bon writes this, and it is just brilliant. The conciser an affirmation is, the more destitute of every appearance of proof, the more weight it carries. I really want you to absorb that paradox. The more destitute of proof it is, the emptier it is, the more weight it carries. This is exactly why the most vacuous, empty online quotes feel so deeply profound when you're scrolling. Their very lack of proof, their total sheer emptiness, is exactly what makes them feel so heavy and undeniable to a mind that is operating in a highly suggestible crowd-induced state. Moving right along to Section 3, endless unconscious repetition. This is where the unconscious programming really begins.
But listen, a single affirmation, no matter how bold it is fleeting. It's just a spark that can very easily burn out and be forgotten. To truly manipulate the crowd and forge an entirely new reality, the manipulator absolutely needs the second pillar of Le Bon's formula. Let's slowly walk through this timeline together. First, a baseless claim is affirmed, boldly, totally without proof. Second, it is endlessly repeated, across feeds, across networks, across a million different conversations. Third, the original source of the claim is completely forgotten. Nobody knows who said it first. And fourth, because the source is gone and the repetition is literally everywhere you look, it is accepted as absolute truth. This right here is exactly how a fleeting, utterly unverified social media post transforms into an accepted, unshakable group narrative.
Let's just dwell on this philosophical, honestly, almost chilling concept from Le Bon for a second. He noted that the repeated statement is embedded in the long run in those profound regions of our unconscious selves in which the motives of our actions are forged. Let that sink in. Repetition isn't just about memory, it's not flashcards. It's about deep psychological programming. By repeating the empty affirmation constantly, it bypasses your conscious filter entirely and physically burns itself into the deep, dark, unconscious layers of your mind. We eventually forget who even said the quote. We just feel, deep down in our bones, that it simply must be true.
When affirmation and repetition hit that critical mass together, they trigger what Le Bon called contagion. Ideas, sentiments, and emotions begin to spread rapidly through the digital echo chamber with the exact same intensity and mechanics as a physical microbe, like a virus. Once the contagion takes hold, the individual is effectively lost. They will readily and happily sacrifice their own personal interest to the collective emotion. The panic, the sheer outrage, or even the toxic positivity spreads invisibly, infecting quite literally everyone who is plugged into that crowd's network.
Okay, let's look at Section 4, thinking in grandiose images. Welcome to the crowd imagination. Now, we really need to shift our focus to the internal cognitive mechanism of the crowd here. How exactly does the crowd's brain actually process these repeated affirmations if it isn't using logic? Well, the answer is fascinating and, frankly, a little terrifying. It processes them not as text, not as arguments, but as pure illusions. Consider the stark difference. An isolated individual relies on reasoning. They look for chains of logical evidence. A causes B, which results in C. Makes sense. But crowd thinking operates entirely in disjointed, fantastical images. Le Bon tells us that to impress a crowd, you cannot work upon their intelligence. Don't even try. You have to present them with a startling and very, very clear image, completely freed from all accessory explanation.
And here is Le Bon explaining this exact mechanism. A crowd thinks in images, and the image itself immediately calls up a series of other images, having no logical connection with the first. Think back to that toxic, empty quote in your family group chat with the sunset. The words themselves don't actually matter. The quote evokes a grandiose, highly subjective image in the mind of the digital citizen, perhaps an image of themselves as an unbothered, lone warrior, or maybe a misunderstood genius. They immediately accept this cinematic illusion as an objective reality, completely ignoring the fact that the underlying ideas have literally no logical connection whatsoever.
This leads us to a highly cynical yet undeniably accurate observation of our modern online world. In the crowd state, the unreal has almost as much influence as the real. The crowd is perpetually hovering on this weird borderland of unconsciousness. Because they do not use the critical spirit, truth and illusion become completely, 100% indistinguishable. If the empty quote makes them feel a powerful image, well, then that image is their truth. That nuanced data spreadsheet you shared, that's just boring reality. And crowds absolutely despise boring reality. They will always prefer the intoxicating illusion.
Finally, Section 5, your cognitive shield. This is how we actually defend our minds against all of this.
We've spent this whole time diagnosing the illness using this brilliant 19th century sociological lens. But how do we actually survive this today? Let's transition to a practical 21st century toolkit. I want to intellectually empower you right now to build your own cognitive shield. Here is exactly how you actively use Le Bon's insights to defend your mind out there. First, notice the total lack of proof.
When you see a bold statement, pause and ask, where is the actual reasoning? If it's missing, your alarm bells should immediately ring. Second, identify extreme exaggeration. Are they demanding you feel a violent, absolute sentiment? Third, track the mindless repetition. Have you seen this exact phrasing from 5 different, totally unrelated accounts? That's contagion at work. And finally, separate the emotional image from the actual fact. Take a breath and ask yourself, am I agreeing with this because it's objectively true, or just because it paints a grandiose, flattering picture in my head?
So, we've explored the rather dark architecture of crowd psychology today. We've seen exactly how pure affirmation, totally stripped of all logic, combined with endless repetition, can hijack our feeds and, ultimately, our minds. So, I want to leave you with this lingering challenge as you return to your screens. Will you recognize the manipulation in the very next quote you see? Will you succumb to the unreasoning, intoxicating image of the crowd, or will you stand apart, fully equipped with your cognitive shield, and demand the nuance? Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you in the next explainer.